But the first part of today's program, we're going to discuss the vote on SB 403. Then we're going to go ahead and talk about what's transpired thus far, what has changed since the bill was first introduced, and where do we go next and what happens next. We want to start by just reminding everyone that if you have any questions, we're going to definitely have a lot of time to go through Q&A at the end. Please go ahead and enter it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to enter it in anytime. We're probably not going to answer most of those until we get to the Q&A session, but definitely keep popping those questions in. We're also going to try to take on some questions that were pre-submitted as well through the Zoom registration link. But again, feel free to enter in anything that you want to ask in the Q&A section. Just a friendly reminder, just to be respectful in any of your questions and any messages that you're putting into the chat. We do reserve the right to remove anybody if the need arises. And one final housekeeping item, just as a reminder that today's presentation cannot be recorded, shared, or otherwise disseminated in whole or in part without the express written consent from the Hindu American Foundation. But thankfully, today's event is being live broadcast thanks to Diya TV. And that is going to be the public part of the event. And then we're going to go ahead and close it out for Q&A and next steps. But without further ado, let's go ahead and start our discussion. So again, many of you may have watched today the vote having live. It was definitely happened very quickly. And we know that we had all been waiting in anticipation. If you didn't have a chance to either watch the vote happen live or did not hear about it through WhatsApp or any other way, SB 403 unfortunately did pass through the floor of the Assembly earlier today. If you look on the screen here, it has a total vote. Now there are 80 members in the Assembly, so that requires a 41 vote majority. And so 50 members voted yes, 3 voted no, and 27 abstained. So that is quite significant. Obviously, it's not the result that we wanted in that it did pass. However, I think we have to look at the fact that not just 3 members voted no, but there were enough questions that came up and that made 27 members not feel comfortable enough to give this a yes vote. And that was across party lines. So a number of both Democrats and Republicans abstained. And we'll talk a little bit about the significance of that going forward. But just take a look at this. If you have any questions about this, feel free to pop them into the Q&A again. This is the breakdown. The little green arrow signifies a yes, or triangle signifies a yes vote going in the up direction, and then the red triangle going down is a no. So you can see the names here, but we can go over that a little bit later as well if anybody has any more specific questions about particular Assembly members. And so that was today's vote. But just to quickly recap, let's take a look at what has happened so far over the last several months. So first, it started out and when the bill was introduced. Remember, it was introduced as a spot bill. Then it's suddenly at the last moment, a number of changes were made to the bill that added caste to it. Originally, the spot bill only talked about discrimination on the basis of ancestry. Then we saw the addition of several xenophobic and racist statements about South Asians into the bill in the introductory sections, as well as the creation of caste as a standalone category and a amendment of existing California law. After that version was introduced or amended, it moved forward and it was assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee. In the Senate Judiciary Committee, it passed through without any changes. Then it moved on to the Senate floor, and I believe except for one no vote and one abstention, if I recall correctly, it pretty much voted almost unanimously and passed through the Senate floor. Came through to the Assembly side, and on the Assembly side, it has to go through the exact same process. It went to Judiciary Committee. Here, however, there were a lot of amendments made thanks to the hard work of all of you in the community, a number of organizations, and just a lot of tireless efforts by a lot of people showing up in person, writing letters, making phone calls, holding community events to educate people, and really doing a lot of yeoman's work. So with that, and these changes will be discussed in a little bit, but significant changes were made to the bill in the Assembly Judiciary Committee. And that amended version did pass out of Judiciary Committee and then went on to the Assembly floor, which we saw the vote, of course, today. Now, what has impacted the vote along the way? Number one, obviously, is the optics of the vote. On the surface, again, SB 403 seems like it's a bill that just addresses discrimination. Who wants to be seen as voting against that? Number two is that first of all, the bill itself was authored and co-authored by two women of color, both South Asian, if you consider Afghanistan part of South Asia, which I would, in Senator Wahab, as well as Assemblymember Jasmeet Bains on the Assembly side, were both author and co-author of the bill, respectively. Then it was kind of steered through a little bit by another Assembly member who is of South Asian descent, Ash Kalra. When other Assembly members and senators see that these two Assembly members plus the author, Senator Wahab, are all people of color supporting cast, and a lot of people don't know about this issue, they're going to defer to them. Then it's gotten a lot of endorsements along the way. The California Democratic Party, not just the Progressive Caucus, but the entire Democratic Party just passed a resolution to endorse the bill, as has the API caucus. So unfortunately, we have seen a lot of people throwing their weight behind the bill. And so, with that, a lot of people are going to defer to them again, and it's going to make our jobs that much more difficult. But that being said, again, a lot of changes were made. A lot of work was done, and that showed in terms of today's vote. And so just moving along here, what happens next? So here is obviously a little bit in terms of the next steps. Now it's going to go back to the Senate, and they're going to have a quick conference. Most likely it'll be pretty much just a formality, and then the Senate has to pass out the final version of SB 403, which we expect to happen. Then it will be enrolled, meaning it's passed the legislature and is actually put into written form and formalized. And then basically it will have Assembly and Senate take a floor vote on the final version. And then it's going to be sent to the governor's desk. Now, I know there's a lot of confusion about how long the governor actually has to sign it. Since this will likely, these next steps will likely wrap up in the next few days, the governor will have 12 days to either sign, veto, or send back the bill. And the confusion about that is whether it's 12 or 30 days. Now, the 30-day period only applies in certain circumstances, and that is if it basically gets passed out and sent to the governor's desk on the last day of the floor session, which is September 14th, because there may be a lot of bills that are going to the governor's desk at that time. And so given the volume, then the the volume of those bills, then the governor would have 30 days from September 14th until October 14th to pass to sign or veto the bills. However, because SB 403 is likely to go to the governor's desk much earlier, he will have that 12-day period to sign or veto the bill. And if anybody has any questions about that, we can discuss that further in the Q&A section as well. So with that being said, I want to now just talk a little bit about where are we now and what have we accomplished, and looking at the various versions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Suhag.
Thanks, Samir. So Samir has mentioned a couple of times that SB 403 was drastically amended after it left the Senate and moved into the Assembly. So I want to talk a little bit about, what exactly changed. First and foremost, caste was what would be called a statutory illegal category. And in the first version of SB 403, which passed the Senate, once it left the Judiciary Committee, it was no longer a standalone category, but it was what's called a clarification of law. So similar to how other categories like sex, have been clarified through statute to include things like gender identity or sexual orientation. In that way, what was a standalone category was removed altogether, and this became a clarification bill on exactly what ancestry, which was already a category under the Unruh Act and under California non-discrimination law, what ancestry meant exactly. So what was added were a number of different ways of clarifying what ancestry means. So those were lineal descent, heritage, parentage. Unfortunately, caste still remained. And caste additionally was then defined as an individual's perceived position in a system of social stratification on the basis of inherited status. And then this talks about how it's enforced through marriage, sometimes in private and public segregation, and other ways. What exactly this definition of caste means remains to be seen. It certainly is very vague in terms of giving any sort of direction to corporations or colleges, or even places that host public accommodations, that would be hotels and restaurants and clubs, as to what this exactly means. And so we'll definitely be watching it clearly. But where caste was mentioned as a standalone category at least 45 times in the first version of the bill, it went down to 7 or 8. And so this is, an incremental win, but for sure, and definitely a testament to all the organizations that have been involved in advocating against this really racist bill, getting behind the same set of amendments. It's still problematic. First is that caste, as you can see, is the only term, even amongst all the clarifying terms, that's exclusively associated with one group, not just exclusively associated with one group in the public imagination, but by California state's own law. The California Education Code mandates that caste be taught as something that is exclusive to India and Hinduism specifically. So there's still the danger of a discriminatory impact or disparate treatment of South Asians, and certainly stigma. We already know that the stigma and the damage of SB 403, we're already seeing it. I think that 3 or 4 years ago, if you had asked us, how often do you hear about caste? It would really be more in the context of school textbooks and maybe hearing from students who were feeling like they were being bullied or asked, pretty racist questions when they were covering India and Hinduism in 6th grade or 9th grade. Now, all of a sudden, we're hearing from tech workers. We're hearing from college students who are being asked, what is your caste? If you are ever asked that sort of question, you need to report it. It's a racist question. So there's still problems with it. And certainly the, removal of 45 times caste being included. Also, I'll go over on the next slide some of the specific targeting of India and South Asia. While all of that has been removed, at least in the language or the face of the bill, it doesn't erase the fact that this was intended by Senator Wahab to apply to South Asians. We know this because the language of her original bill said as much. All the public statements she made said as much, as did all the supporting documentation that she, as well as the lead sponsor of this bill, Equality Lab, submitted, leaving the consultant for the Judiciary Committee pointing that very thing out, that everything that they submitted only further equated caste with South Asia. If we can go to the next slide. So to give you an idea, just to see the kind of changes, the previous version had mentions of caste oppressed of individuals. Who are they? not defined, but they originate from South Asia, specifically India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. The allegations were made without any sort of evidence that caste discrimination is present across South Asia and the South Asian diaspora, found in all communities of all religious backgrounds. Accusations were made of caste-based rape, gender violence, housing discrimination, workplace discrimination, and all sorts of other violence without a splick of evidence. All of that is now gone from SB 403. And of course, this all was to support the addition of a standalone category. That too is gone. I know that it's taken months and months of making phone calls, making meetings, and there's definitely a fatigue and a feeling of defeat. But where we are today is a testament to people getting activated, where we were a community that was not as civically engaged as we needed to be. But I think that people went through our trainings, took out the time to do this. So where we are now is that we have been able to remove some of the most heinous and xenophobic accusations that that actually every California senator agreed to. So what we achieved in the assembly is something that's remarkable. And so this then brings an end to our public portion of tonight's town hall. We're going to move on to our closed session for just the community. So thank you, Diya TV, for broadcasting this portion of our town hall. And we'll be discussing some of our next steps for the community and answering all the questions that have come in through the registration link and any questions that might pop up here during our live session.